Hey everybody, Amish Shah here, and I also have Jason Martell and Walter Cruddington with me here as well. So say hi everybody.
Hi,
And
everybody.
so we are live here. Walter thank you for joining us here so much. Jason, thank you very much as well. Walter, we just recently promoted and talked about your great film, The Great Year, and what it has to do with the cycles of time. And so, for those of you that are on this call right now, please excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, so just still getting over a cold. But really excited to have everybody on the call today and really, really talk about a subject that's very important to all of us as human beings, as a culture, as a society, as a world, as where we're moving to in the future and where all this information has come from and all the research that Walter has done and I have done and Jason has done and just talk about this film, talk about the cycles of time and just have a good time. And we're also going to be taking some questions from the audience. So feel free to pop in, ask questions. If you haven't seen the film yet, please go to the great screening page and watch the film. Not during this, but after this call, the film will still be up. For those of you that have seen it, go ahead and start asking the questions, and we'll start relaying them. If you are having audio issues or if you're having video issues, I suggest restarting GoToWebinar or restarting your computer. That's usually the best solution for problems like this. It's really a very simple software to use. If you load it, you should be able to see our screen and you should be able to hear us. Check your speakers, check your volume, make sure your computer is working properly. Just make sure all that is okay um, before saying you can't hear, just because I think most of us can hear and most of us can see at the moment. So please check that stuff first. And that's it. I mean, those are like the basics, the groundwork, I guess we could say. So why don't we just start with Walter? Walter, welcome, first of all, and why don't we just get a little background about you and what your research and the film that we just recently showed to our audience, and give us a little background around what started all this and how it all began.
Sure. Well, um, let me tell you what the inspiration for the film was. I'm just a regular person going through life, taking history classes like anybody else, and I was fascinated with the very ancient cultures and the fact that many of them were quite advanced. The Sumerian culture was quite advanced. They had indoor plumbing systems. They had municipal sewer systems. They built, massive structures. And by the time of the Dark Ages, it had pretty much gone to nomadic tribes. Same thing in the Indus Valley. Very advanced building systems and structures. And that too was just mud huts by the time of the Dark Ages. And of course, we know what happened to Egypt and Greece and Rome, etc. So it seemed to me that history wasn't so linear after all, that maybe it was cyclical, and maybe some of this myth and folklore about a long lost golden age might have some truth to it. And so that idea just kind of stood in the back of my mind, and I didn't do anything about it for almost 20 years. And I came across a book called The Holy Science by Swami Sri Yukteswar, written in 1894. And the book is really about enlightenment and sort of how to get there. It's about love, really. And but in the introduction, he just makes sort of a passing reference and saying the reason people of the 20th century can't understand these concepts very well right now are because we're in a very low yuga, and that's because our sun goes around another star, and when we're far away like we are now, our understanding isn't very clear. And so, man, I thought there is a hypothesis to explain why you have, higher civilizations in the past, why they go away, and now why we're sort of coming back up again. And so that was the inspiration for the film, and we had a lot of fun making it.
Walter, I know. Oh, and am I able to speak as well, Amish, as a presenter? Great. Um, One of the things that I was intrigued about too, in noticing that the research that you've done in preparation for this film I came across some article which channels kind of cross paths. Another physicist, his name is Mark Carlotto, Dr. Mark Carlotto. I don't know if this rings a bell or not, but it's a website called New Frontiers in Science, and it was an article that you and Vince had published about understanding the precession of the equinox. And I found myself referencing this PDF, and here I get to the bottom, and I'm like, it's written by Walter. So maybe you could at least, without getting too technical, but man, the data, that some of the information that you procured in looking at and understanding why you were able to reduce this unbelievable complex model of precession to what you've reduced it to now is very fascinating.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jason. So the way Sri Yukteswar explains it, I think, is one of the simplest ways. He says, there's three motions of the Earth that we're all familiar with. It spins on its axis, and that very motion causes a cycle. It causes a cycle of night and day. And our bodies are adapted to that cycle, to the waxing and waning light. And so we go from a conscious state, during light, to subconscious, when it's dark for long periods of time. And photosynthesis, of course, only occurs during the light phase, and many other changes take place. But it's so common we hardly even think about it anymore. The second motion, of course, is the Earth orbits the Sun, and during that process, you have the changing of the seasons. You have trillions of plants that spring forth and give their fruit, and then you have billions of animals migrating, spawning en masse. And then it all kind of goes in reverse with hibernation cycles and and fall and winter, and the planet sort of goes quiet again. And so Yukteswar said there's an even larger celestial cycle that we've kind of lost sight of, the precession of the equinox. And we see it in the sky just like we see the other two. We see the diurnal motion by the sun rising in the east, setting in the west, and all the stars, of course, moving with it. And we see the yearly motion by a different constellation being overhead each month, roughly, of the 12 ancient constellations. And we see the precession of the equinox by looking on a particular day where the sun is, what constellation it's in. So about 4,000 years ago, we saw the sun in the constellation of Aries. This is on the spring equinox. 2,000 years ago, we saw it in the constellation of Pisces. And now it's, getting very close to the constellation of Aquarius, the so-called dawning of the age of Aquarius. And so that is the observable of precession. It's really quite a simple thing. It only moves 1 degree per lifetime. It takes 72 years to move a degree, so it's not really noticeable to the average human. But the explanation for precession is sort of where we went wrong. The Dark Age explanation sort of still pervades, and it's very convoluted. It doesn't work very well. It now has 4,000 inputs because they keep changing it to try to make it work because the rate of precession changes slightly. And so we came up with a different model and said, what if indeed what we call precession is not just the wobbling of the Earth affected by the mass of the sun and the moon, but is indeed the sun moving through different constellations. And using that kind of model, Kepler's laws, we only needed about 6 inputs. And it is so predictable. It works to predict the changing rate of precession. We ran it over the last 200 years and found out that it was 43 times more accurate in predicting little changes in the precession rate. So we believe, that precession observable is what we're seeing as our whole solar system is moving around another star. And with it, it sort of signals changes in the consciousness and the history of mankind.
Well, it's so heavy. And Amish, I just wanted to make one quick follow-up comment about this. one thing you mentioned, about the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and in doing a little research, I know there's different mainstream views on as to when the actual crossover date is, but I personally found fascinating some of the tie-ins of other cultures, and I wanted to get your opinion. We talked about this briefly the other night on Coast to Coast, but the Greeks called it the different ages, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, or Iron Age, Bronze Age, Silver, Golden. And then we have the Hindus, obviously, as you're intimately familiar with, in the Yuga cycles, Satya Yuga, Treta. But then also the Mayans, instead of calling it ages or yugas, called it different worlds. And I thought that was very interesting hindsight, and realizing that a lot of the predictions that got of public media attention for the end of the world in 2012, could that have been simply we were just going into the age of Aquarius, and one of the Mayan worlds, an epoch of time, an age, was just simply passing?
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation for it. I think technically speaking, the Mayans actually used the word suns, or that's how they interpret the word. But you're right, the Hopi used the word worlds, and there's actually 30 different cultures that talked about this cycle, and they all used, different terms, and some of them simply made reference to the higher ages or the lower ages. But I like some of the references by the Mesopotamian cultures, Sumeria, Akkadia, Babylons, and this is the work of Stefan Moll. He's sort of the foremost, guy that can read these cuneiform tablets, and even he himself admits that, I'm not reading them as much as I'm just tracing the meaning of the words through as many different cultures as possible to get some idea of what they're talking about. But he kept coming across the point that they're always referring to their future, when things are advanced and wonderful and beautiful, is behind them, because they're writing this at a time that the world is in decline, and they're worried about what we would call our future, and they refer to as their past that they were going into, which was the Dark Ages, and they were absolutely right. They went into just a horrible time. So we find this all over the world, including Polynesian cultures, Nordic cultures. They're all making reference to a long-lost golden age of some type.
Yeah, based on my research as well, what we've seen is from the golden age of India. They've always talked about the golden age of India, where they talked about in the different yugas, people would have different lifespans actually, and people would live up to 1,000 years, or 100,000 years, or 10,000 years, depending on which yuga they were brought up in, and it was due to the stars and the motion of the stars and the suns and the way that it was all put together that gave that ability. So that golden age, the golden age, and having the whole. I remember hearing it for the first time about the whole dual sun system. I was like, wait a second, like. There's something going on there, and then I remember the references that you were talking about, and hearing these references about having such a system, and it just kind of clicked that the golden age was at some point maybe is completely related to the precession and how that affected consciousness and the ability of humans, basically.
Yeah, that point you made there about the ability of humans is a good one, because it's not just that the outer world changes, it's that we're changing, our consciousness is changing, and that's reflected in the outer world. So, just going from the depths of the Kali Yuga, what the Greeks call the Iron Age, 500, 1,000 years ago, when man believed he's just a physical thing. He had no knowledge of finer forces. He didn't know about magnetism or electricity or molecules or atoms or anything like this. Just going from there through the Renaissance, which is sort of the birth of the, this Dwapara Yuga, the Bronze Age, he discovers all these things, and he discovers them because his consciousness is changing. He's able to see more and do more. And I know we're still in a fairly low age relative to the golden age, but 600 years ago, virtually every country was at war with one another. Every county and city were at war with one another. Plagues ravaged the earth, wiping out like a third of the earth or a quarter of the population, stuff like this. Laws were whatever the brutal dictator in power decided, and churchianity was, driven by inquisitions and things like this. It was really a pretty sad place. And so we have come a long way, and I know there's a lot of complaints about the current world, but I think we're moving at an exceptional rate, expansion of consciousness, and it's showing up more in our technology, our gizmos, and our gadgets than it is in our institutions, because these institutions, be they churches or banking institutions or whatever, take a long time. These are big organizations. They take a long time to sort of break down, change, and new ones to take their place.
Hmm.
One quick comment too. You mentioned, about the dual suns. Both of you mentioning, the binary, which obviously, Walter, I'd love to pick your brain a little bit more about some of those finer points. And I know that you've mentioned several times Hamlet's Mill in reference, the work of this great professor and his companion. And it's interesting that over 30 cultures reference this dual sun mentality. And Amish, if I could, I'd like to share my screen for 1 minute to just show.
Yeah. So let me
do that.
let me do that real quick. There you go.
Great. Let me just close this up here. Okay, so I thought it was just interesting that I wanted to at least show this slide. This is a Mesopotamian Sumerian artifact, and what's interesting is that it's the classic Tower of Babel scene. Sorry, guys, follows. It's a classic Tower of Babel scene, but if you notice here, as some people like Zachariah Sitchin interpreted, they're building a rocket ship at the top here, or some tower of some kind. But what's interesting is if you look closely at the top, there's two suns. Here's a clear picture of that, the actual rendition, and you can see it's just interesting that there are several cultures, again, Sumerian times and probably earlier, but many different cultures seem to have this knowledge of dual suns. And then just lastly, again, we're talking about the knowledge of their astronomy and how it was so high back then. We're talking about thousands of years ago. They knew that the sun was in the center. And then we've digressed and gone through the times of Copernicus and Galileo and others until we rediscovered this information. But it is very interesting, Walter, as you mentioned, that we had this information and then lost it in the Dark Ages and are now just rediscovering it. So the whole idea of two suns, I think, is a very heavy concept that I hope that the audience can get their mind around. That's all I wanted to share.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jason. I think that's very important because there's a lot of evidence of sort of these changing ages and higher cultures in the past and a dark age, but people always ask, what's the cause? And so I think that this Sri Yukteswar's work showing that it's a celestial cause just that makes these changes, just like it's a celestial cause that makes the yearly changes or the daily changes. And of course, that leads us to the whole point of, if we are in a binary system, where is this other star, and why haven't we seen it yet? And of course,
Exactly. That's a big question.
a ton of work going on there.
And I know that you said more recently, I remember sometimes I hear you guys' conversation when we met up that there's news showing up more and more that there is proof that this system exists, and it's not proof, but it's like more and more is showing us that we're seeing that there is something there. So can you talk a little bit more about that, the existence of this other system?
Yeah, so, there's a bunch of astronomical issues that people are trying to figure out that are sort of little mysteries, like the angular momentum of the planets, or the, why Pluto is inclined to the plane of the rest of the planets, and many of the dwarf stars are known, and things like this. And of course, why precession is at a changing its rate each year and things like this. So we're kind of looking at this whole body of astronomical questions and bringing this hypothesis in that, well, if our solar system is indeed part of a companion star system, which most systems are, by the way, almost 80% according to the NASA Chandra website, are in dual or multiple star systems. And so if you use that as a hypothesis, it's amazing how you can start to explain a lot of this other information. So like the sun's loss of angular momentum is not really lost at all. It's just not completely in its spin. It's in its motion through space. And the reason that so many of these dwarf planets, including Pluto, are sort of angled below the plane is because something else is stretching them. And there's been a lot of articles on this lately. It's mostly astronomers that don't know anything about this great year and hypothesis of a companion star, but they're looking at the strange orbits and periodicities of the dwarf planets, and saying, my God, there has to be something affecting them. And this is Mike Brown at Caltech saying this, the two Spanish astronomers that just came out, and others. So it's, I think it's an exciting time where there's, instead of us kind of thinking we have it all figured out, there's just more and more questions that, in my opinion, are not going to be answered until we realize that there is something very big, very massive, some gravitational stellar-sized body that's affecting our solar system.
A quick question, Walter, if I may, Mish. The information relating to all these articles that we keep seeing about, whether it's reported as a possible planet X or some large gravitational, perturbation or something affecting a pole, a lot of times, as you mentioned, they're not aware of this cyclical knowledge or, ancient references. And I just wanted to ask a question and make a comment, which is, one, you mentioned the other night on the air, Sirius is literally the brightest star in the sky. And if that is the most likely candidate, which I'd like to quiz you on here in a minute, but if Sirius is the most likely candidate to be the second sun, I find it interesting that if it is the brightest star in the sky, what happens to us in the golden age when those two suns are at their closest point and we'd be getting all this extra sunlight? My point about that is just that, if we look at today, when the sun rises, all the plants lean towards the sun, everyone gets happy and comes awake when the sun is out, and then we all fall asleep when it gets dark. So the combination of those two suns, I think, is a very fascinating correlation to the extra energy also happening within the golden age. So I'd just like for you to comment a little bit more about, do you think any of these discoveries of the latest astronomical findings, are they aware that Sirius could possibly be that gravitational effect?
So that's one working hypothesis, that it's a very visible star like Sirius, which is, close and massive. It's the largest local solar mass, three suns, if you will, because it has Sirius B going around it. So it's the only neutron star in our local neighborhood. It's a white dwarf, very, very heavy, creating a dent in space that, local things would go around. But there's also the hypothesis that some are working on that, maybe it's a brown dwarf towards the galactic center and therefore difficult to see, or something else. And so I think it's great that we have these different hypotheses going on. But let me try to quickly address one of your earlier points too. So what happens as the two stars get closer to each other? there's an important point here that um, celestial movements, they don't affect our free will. We live our lives. It's just sort of the space climate or environment, or, if you will. So it probably changes the magnetosphere of our planet, the ionosphere of our planet, which is the electromagnetic soup that we live in, if you will. And people have done work like Dr. Valerie Hunt at UCLA that shows, when we're separated from that sort of this natural uh, ambiance that we live in, this subtle energy, that we get very sad. And she's done this by putting people in Faraday cages and things like that. Versus when we're around a rich, enhanced source of it, like negative ions, which are generated by waterfalls and breaking waves and things like this. People are, even on a happier, clearer state. And so I think that that's going on a mass scale as our planet, or as our two stars are far away from each other. That effect is very weak. As we get closer, it probably strengthens. And it may not be just the electromagnetic influences of the other star. It could well be that it's driving our planet closer to and farther from another point in space that also has some effect, a third star. And there's some talk about this Vishnu Navi, maybe the Pleiades or something like this. But we'll leave that for another subject right now. Amish, I was wondering, are people going to have questions and come in? Because I'd love to dig into them.
Let's see, I think we did see a list of questions there. I'll take a look as well.
Can they just type them in there? Is that how it works? I can't hear Amish.
There you go. There you go. Sorry, I've been talking and my mic was on mute. So I was saying, if you have questions, go ahead and put them into the questions box, and we'll be answering them. So yeah, we're just going to go and take questions here for Walter and Jason or myself. And the first question I have here is from Steve, and it says, exactly where are we in the cycle right now?
Great question. You can tell time in the great year by using either equinox as an hour hand. I find the autumnal equinox is the best hour hand because it is at the lowest point down by Virgo and Libra in the dark ages, so the bottom of the clock, you will, and it's a 24,000-year clock, 12,000 years up, 12,000 years down. Our current system of time with 12 hours of AM and 12 hours of PM, in fact, is based on the great year. This information's kind of been lost. We can trace it back to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, but nobody really knows where the current clock came from. Anyway, if you're using the autumnal equinox as the hour hand, we're near the bottom, just barely coming out of the dark ages. And when it gets back to the higher point, around Aries again, you will see we get back into the golden age. And there is a ton of myth and folklore too about this. That Aries is a ram, and Jason and the Argonauts are looking for the fleece, the golden fleece of this ram. They're looking for that consciousness worn in the higher ages. There's tons of Egyptian statues that sort of pay tribute to the Aries, the ram, and other stories in the Book of Job, and also they're all over the place that kind of hint that when the autumnal equinox is in that position, that it's a very high time on planet Earth, and when we're in the opposite, which we're pretty close to right now, it's a fairly low time on planet Earth. So it's just dawning, and it's a pretty good time. I'm very optimistic.
Cool.
Yeah, Walter, you bring up a really good point there about these astronomical references, and you mentioned earlier that a lot of times they would mark their higher ages as being in the past. And so a lot of these archaeological anomalies are still existent, and we're scratching our heads as to what they mean. For instance, the Dendera relief in Egypt. It's showing a relief of the sky of what they would have seen thousands of years before, supposedly 2500 BC. So it starts to make sense that they were marking a higher age and that they were trying to hang on to that knowledge.
I totally agree. Right on. Yeah, a lot of the bas reliefs we see seem to reference a point other than
Wow.
the time they were made.
That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
And I just wanted to tie that into some geological evidence. I know that you've had Dr. Carmen Bolter speak many times at CPAC, and you were actually involved in her trilogy, the Pyramid Code. And one of the things that I think she brings to light, which is a very esoteric point, is that the astronomical data, while it's cyclical, gives us markers in space, but we can also use the geological evidence to mark actual dates of time, meaning the Nile River was supposed to lap right up on the shores of the pyramids at one point, and now geologically we can see the Nile is meandered, way over to where it is. So I just thought you maybe could comment on, what your opinion is on some of this geological evidence, and you too, Amish, obviously with Dwarka, that there's a lot of these like underwater cities and things that just point to a higher technology that's still buried.
Completely. It's written everywhere. It's like you said, it's in almost every ancient culture talking about a higher age of some sort with higher advanced technologies and knowledge and consciousness and just understanding of energy and manipulation of that energy. And it's pretty cool. It's pretty powerful.
Good. Hey, what do you say we try to knock out some of these questions that
Yeah,
are
let's go.
on the board there?
Why wouldn't our partner star be the next closest star that we do know of?
That's a very good point. But the way gravity seems to work, it's not so much the close proximity as it is the heavy thing. So we believe that Sirius is making the biggest dent in space. So if you think of one of those Einstein grids, where he shows the Earth making a small little dent in space, and then our sun making a heavier dent, well, you'd have the Sirius system making a much heavier dent. So although the planets can go around the little dent of the Earth, the whole solar system would go around the sort of the deepest dent in nearby space. And I'm not saying we have it all figured out by any means. It could well be that the other stars and nearby stars are Alpha Centauri, Bernard Star are involved in this. As a matter of fact, Bernard Star, which is exactly opposite both the plane and the side of the solar system that Sirius is on, it has the highest proper motion of any star. So it may be some indication that our perspective changes a little bit, or it is involved in this whole process.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Next question. Enoch from the Sumerian tablets mentioned flying to a binary star system. Is that implying he flew toward the other sun and visited a distant planet orbiting the other star? And I know that's questionable, and I know that's it's a question, so I'll leave it to either of you to answer that.
Yeah, I really don't know, of course, but there are ancient references to flight, which Jason knows as much about as anybody. And isn't it interesting that we didn't even think flight was possible? They found that object in the with the Egyptian tombs that's a glider, and they just almost didn't even know what it was. Now that we have planes, oh, it's obviously a glider. So I'm sure that the Vimanas and things like that, Jason can address at some point.
Oh no, I mean you're hitting it on the head. I mean I'd keep it a little high level and just say that referencing terms like cargo cult. There were times even in more modern references when we flew over remote areas, Aboriginal tribes, Australia, South America, or Australia and South Africa, and when the soldiers got off the plane and lit up a cigarette and held out a voice recorder, the Aboriginals didn't understand this technology, and mirrored this by creating straw models of the planes and scraping away runways. But this is what we see across all the cultures, is a very fine-tuned replication, the ability to replicate what they saw with no understanding of possibly what it was or the inner workings of the objects.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Here's a question that says, what was the title of the book you mentioned by the yogi?
Oh, it's called The Holy Science by Swami Sri Yukteswar, and it was published in 1894. He is the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, who came to the West here and wrote a book called Autobiography of a Yogi, which is, a huge bestseller worldwide. So you can read about Sri Yukteswar and the cycles even in the book Autobiography of a Yogi.
Thank you. Okay, here's an interesting question. Please speak to how this binary star theory parallels all human religious systems of faith. Seems that this could have flavored our predecessors' belief system and provide them a way to organize their relationship to the world at large. For example, two suns equating to the Father and the Son. How both are one and the same, influencing each other yet separate, one seen and the other unseen. Could religion be the parable that helped them remember and continue to tell the story of the existence of the two suns?
It's a beautiful question. There's different mindsets in different yugas, and there's not a real sharp cutoff. It's just sort of a change of consciousness over time. But I love the way the Greeks broke it up. They said in the lowest age, it's the age of man. And then man starts to wake up, realize he's more than just the body, and does a lot more, does exploring and invents things, and it's the age of the hero, and that's the age we're just getting into now. And our concepts about religion begin to change from a very material, myopic, paternal, father-run thing that's totally focused on discipline, to more expansive, spiritual thoughts and things like this. And then the next age, the Greeks called the age of the demigods. So this is equivalent to the Treta Yuga in the Indian system. And that's supposed to be a time when telepathy and clairvoyance exist again. And you can just imagine world morals and religion when we're all pretty clear and we can all really understand each other, versus the confusion that seems to reign today. And so a reference to this telepathic age can be found in a lot of pre-Babel myth and folklore. Before Babel, before God confused the tongues, mankind could commune with nature and understand each other very easily. Then Dark Ages, explosion of languages and tongues. And then supposedly, it says this in Autobiography of Yogi, matter of fact, that by the year 4100 AD, we're back enough, getting close enough to our companion star that telepathy and clairvoyance are once again common knowledge. So I bet religion starts to get pretty cool and not all these huge divisions you have right now, where Shiites and Sunnis fighting each other. I don't even know what it's all about, quite frankly. Well, and then the Golden Age, what is that? I mean, you don't even need religion at that point. It's a time of enlightenment, and mankind is directly communing with God. So there's going to be big changes in religions as you go through the different yugas.
I think, Jason, you want to add something to that?
Just a question. When we talk about being in these higher ages and the types of interactions we have with not only species here on Earth, with each other and other life forms, animals and such, but what I think is always fascinating too, and I don't think we understand how to answer it quite yet, but I'd like to get your take on it, is in a lot of these higher ages, we have references to man and the in-between ages as well. Let's say High Sumer, High Egypt. They reference these beings that are physical beings, whether it be in India and like Lord Krishna, or in Mesopotamia, Enki and Enlil, or in South America, we have Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan. And these seem to be, at some point, physical beings that are then mythologicalized, if you will. I'd like to get your take, Walter, on what do you think a lot of these references of these great beings are? I know a lot of people like to just point to them being simply extraterrestrial, but are there other answers to explain these lost connections that all the ancient cultures seem to have a deeper connection with these higher beings that were possibly non-human?
Well, boy, you're getting a deep philosophical question. It is kind of related to the Yuga theory, though, because it gets to the core of what are we? Are we just physical bodies that live for a short period of time and die, and that's it? Or are we, as they say in the higher yugas, we're actually gods and capable of vast and wonderful things? I mean, Christ himself said this, ye are gods. These things that I do, ye shall do also, in greater things. I think that's sort of a high age consciousness that is very rare right now because we're in a low age. But I think it's more prevalent in the higher ages. And yeah, when there's very few people around like that, you do call them gods, because that's what they are relative to us, or saints and sages. But we're in a low yuga right now, so those things are pretty difficult to understand.
Thank you. So real quickly, before we go on to more questions, I want to talk about CPAC. And I want to talk about what CPAC is, what the event is about. I know that we were going to talk about that a little bit, but let's take a little break. Let's talk about CPAC.
Yeah.
What the event is, how it started, how people can attend, what it's about. I will be speaking there as well, so I'd love for anyone that's in California or in the U.S. or anywhere to come check out this event at CPAC. It's in California. So Walter, why don't you explain a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so it's not just me talking about these things, or Jason or yourself. It's now an ever-expanding group of scientists and laymen, independent researchers that get together at the Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge. The website is CPAC, that's CPAKonline.com. And you can see there that this year's event will be held at the Westin Hotel between October 17th and 19th. And we've got some fantastic speakers. Dr. Robert Schoch, one of the foremost geologists, who's famed for redating the age of the Sphinx, and he's got some amazing findings on Göbekli Tepe. We also have Dean Radin, who wrote this book, Supernormal, The Conscious Universe, and he's talking about the ancient Indian teachings you find in Patanjali's writings, and how they're making references to a much higher age, and how it's a real guideline to where we don't have to wait for the sun to get all the way back to its position. There are things that we can do now personally, individually, yoga, meditation, to raise our consciousness and sort of buck the environment of the current yuga that we're in. And again, we have free will. Amit Goswami, yourself talking about the underwater city off coast of India there. Another fellow talking about Atlantis. I mean, it's a great event. So I invite anyone that can to come join us. It's over a couple of days at the Westin Hotel. It's cpaconline.com.
Walter, you've mentioned several times an analogy that I'll always give you credit for, but I think it's very enlightening for people to understand this third cycle of time. When we talk about the precession of the equinox, uh, I too, am very fascinated and still am challenged by this topic. And like my father always told me is, when you're green, you grow, and when you're ripe, you rot. So I want to remain green for a long time. And, I think there's just a lot of information about understanding this from that, it's been with us for a very long time, that we've broken down the heavens in these 12 zodiacal symbols, and that people don't even realize how subtle it's embedded into our lives. For instance, we're just leaving the age of Pisces. Every Christian around the world, especially in the United States, is familiar with seeing a little fish on the back of people's cars or on certain stickers that they think represents Christ. While it does, the symbol of a fish also predates Christianity, representing the symbol of Pisces. So I think it's very fascinating that a lot of these astronomical symbolic references are embedded in our culture, and we're still starting to wrap our brain around what it all means. Like you mentioned, 12 hours in a day, 12 inches in a foot. This 12 is a very ubiquitous system of this cycle of time, and I think people really have a hard time understanding that third cycle. Could you just give that little mayfly analogy, if you would?
It's a good one.
So my main book on this topic is called Lost Star of Myth and Time. I think I have a copy around here somewhere. But it was a little complicated, so I tried to break these concepts down so my grandkids could understand them. And because I think they're so important, they should be taught in school. And so, yeah, in the children's book, The Great Year Adventures with Tommy the Time-Traveling Turtle, we give the mayfly example. And if a mayfly is born on a cloudy, windless day, it thinks that that's how the whole world is, that's how the whole universe is. It never feels the light of sunshine, it never gets the joy of riding on a breeze, because a mayfly only lives for one day. And that is the equivalent of our lifetime in relation to the yuga. If we're, very myopic and only believe that things are how we perceive them now, then we have no better understanding of what life is really like than a mayfly. And so, that's a great book, Tommy the Time-Traveling Turtle.
So here's a good question, and I think this is kind of cool, and it's important too. We're talking about these cycles, and we're talking about all this ancient, golden age and the binary, system and all that kind of stuff. In your articles, The Lost Cycles of Time, we also talk about how this could be used for implications of the future. Now, that was one of the questions here, and I feel it was an important question was, what does this have to do with us right now in this life, and how can we use this type of information to look at what's coming up, and is that even possible?
Yeah, that's what everything should get back to, really. That's great theoretical information, but how does it affect me? And I think the greatest benefit from understanding that very, very wise people lived long ago, long before us, and they left writings and symbols and methodologies on how to expand our consciousness. We can look to these saints and sages of ancient times and see what they said, and improve ourselves, improve our world, just by sort of taking their advice, And they live much more in tune with nature, but even if you kind of leave that part of it out, there's just things we can do just to expand our consciousness and things like meditation, etc. So, and also it's good to know, I think the world kind of right now has a mass hypnosis going on. It's like the person that's hit their head really hard and they have amnesia. When you study amnesia patients, they not only forget their past, but the amazing thing is they're unable to plan for the future. And it's like, you find yourself driving in a car and you don't realize you set off to go to the store, so you don't know where you're going. And that's sort of what the whole planet's like right now. We've forgotten our past, and we've made up some stories about it, that everything's linear. If it came before us, it must be more primitive, because we're so big on this idea of strict evolution. And I do believe in evolution, but I just think it has these cycles in it. And when you start to realize that, oh no, it's much richer, that there are higher ages and lower ages, and that we come from very beautiful times, and we're on our way back there again, that it's a hopeful time for the world. We can do things to live in tune with the higher age teachings, and I hope more of us will.
Nice. Thank you. So we're coming up on the hour here. We still have some questions coming in. Is this being recorded? Yes, it is being recorded. We hope that the technology gods are on our side today and everything works out. We'll let you know about that. There are a couple of questions in here. I do have, we won't be able to get to all the questions right now. We're going to start wrapping it up. Again, if you guys are interested in coming to CPAC, it's going to be in California, October 17th through 19th. It's a short hop, skip, and a jump away for anyone that's in the U.S. For everyone else, it'd be great to have you there as well. There's lots of international people. I'll be speaking. Walter will be speaking as well. There's going to be tons of other great speakers. So that's CPAC Online. The link is in the chat here. And also, for those of you that are interested in Ancient Explorers and what we're doing at Ancient Explorers, and to be involved with some more of these interviews, more of these conversations that we have with experts such as Walter and other experts, we have a program called Ancient Explorers Premium, and that's ancientexplorers.com/premium. I could put that link in there. And so, again, if you haven't watched the documentary, please check it out. That page is, let me just pull that up for you guys here, so you have it in the chat. So that'll be on the.
There's nothing like a video narrated by Darth.
Yeah, it's a great film by Walter. Thank you again, Walter, for joining us.
Yeah, hey, Anish, I think we can power through a couple more questions.
Okay, let's do it. Yeah.
I see the one says, how do you see Tesla energy fitting in? And he was sort of had a consciousness above his age, as many great scientists and saints do. And so, he led, the thinking of the Dwapara age, and I think we'll see his ideas implemented to a greater degree as we advance. Somebody else asked about time. Doesn't time change to some degree? And certainly our perception of time changes, and I like the thought that you brought up. There's so many cultures that talk about, in the lower age, you live to be, maybe 100 years if you're lucky. In the next age, it's a couple hundred years. In the age of the demigods, it's 300-400 years. And then there's all kinds of references to the higher ages about Seth and Methuselah in the Bible that are living 700, 900 years, things like this. And it's not just in the Bible, it's in the king's lists and the Pharaoh's writings, and all over the world they make.
We have some interviews we've done with Greg Braden where he says he's researched that topic as well extensively, and human beings were quite literally the bodies were meant to last 900 plus years.
Yeah. Hey, if anybody has any questions, burning ones they need to get answered, please write me. It's Walter at thebinaryresearchinstitute.org, and I'll try to answer them.
Cool. Let's see if there's any more that we can power through here.
Do we lose all knowledge? Somebody said. Not if we're enlightened, but most of us aren't, so we go through many lifetimes. We went through a pretty bad dark age there, too. It was actually the bottom, not just of the precessional cycle, but an even larger cycle, the universal cycle. So
we
kind of lost extra knowledge. a few things are retained in stone, and I bet we discover some things. Jason, wouldn't it be cool to, find some hidden chamber in some mountain at some point that, you know, for some reason wasn't geologically disturbed? And I bet
It
we're
was
going
really
to.
fun. Well, look, it was fun looking at those petroglyphs with you on Hawaii and breaking it on coast to coast with some user randomly. Always fun to do, of course.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. That was fun. Um, okay, I understand we're still in the Kali Yuga if we were at the bottom of the clock, correct? Yeah, we're just barely out of the Kali Yuga. So we're still in the Kali Yuga of the big cycle universal, but not the precessional cycle. And
Do you believe that there was higher technologies or just a higher state of collective consciousness which could lead to that?
so technologies are a manifestation of our consciousness. As our consciousness rises, we can invent ever more complicated gizmos and gadgets, and that's what we seem to be doing at the time.
Wouldn't the city at the bottom of the Gulf of Cambay be above sea level if it was populated during the last ice age, when the oceans were much lower because so much water was frozen in glaciers? Not sure about that question. Jason, would you have any insight into a question like that about the ice age? And
What is the so the oceans rose about 400 feet, and what's the depth at the bottom of the Bay of Cambay? I think it's only a few hundred feet in a
yeah,
lot
it's
of
a few
places.
hundred feet.
Yeah, so it would have been
300?
above sea level. You know,
Forgive me, I didn't listen to the question entirety there, Amish. I thought you were directing it towards Walter, but
Either. Um,
but
it's
I
just
think
asking.
Walter just answered it there, so that's
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
somebody said, how did we lose this knowledge? Is it natural disasters or something else? And I think it's both. It's both the changing electromagnetosphere that just sort of clogs our knowledge. We'll have a brilliant speaker, John Deering, at the conference that's going to talk about this and give an analogy about this, how it's kind of like you're in a car trying to get reception on your radio, but the antenna is far away. So anyway, I know we're getting to the end of the program, Amish. I don't want to hog the time here.
No, I just want to be respectful of everyone's time, not just ours. Thank you, Walter, for joining us. Jason, thank you. Everyone in the audience, thank you, guys. We had a full show today, and
Great questions from the audience.
Great questions. I know that there's more questions, obviously, and we will try to answer all of them. You do, please do check out the link, cpaconline.com, if you are interested in the event. Please come. You can learn more about the precession, this ancient knowledge, the yugas, the time cycles, and all of this stuff that we're talking about. And if you're interested in getting more monthly type of content from Jason and myself and people that we interview, Ancient Explorers Premium would be great as well. So you can totally check that out on our website. And if you haven't seen the movie yet, The Great Year, please go watch the movie, The Great Year. It's going to be free for a limited time, so please check it out. And that's it. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for joining me.
Thank you, guys. Have a great night.
And thanks. Okay.
I'm going to keep reading the questions and I'll answer them, but
Okay, that's fine.
okay.
Keep it running. It's fine.
Keep it running.
Because the shape of an ellipse is based on 2 points in its interior, why can't the position of our partner star be located in a similar way as other point in the interior of an ellipse? I think there are people that are using the major axis of the ellipses of the dwarf planets to try to figure out possible locations. And I think most of them, in fact, point towards Sirius. You'll see a large conglomeration there. You are giving physically based explanations of these cycle phenomena. The Greeks had many gods. Could they have been referring to spiritual entities as being causal factors in these phenomena? I'm sure there are. The age of the demigods, Hollywood paints the demigods as when a human marries a god. That's a Hollywood demigod. Whereas the higher teachings, they would say, no, it's when a human is sort of woken up enough to start to realize that he is a god. And it's supposed to be a higher time, and you're starting to see other dimensions and things like that. I think that's why there's this huge body of myth and folklore that we can't make sense of now, because we're just not even tuned into all the dimensions in which it's appearing. Okay. It just goes on and on and on. I guess we'll have to do this another time. Thank you so much.
It's great. No, it's good, guys. If Amish, we're gonna cut it here, then we'll call it a night. But maybe we can have Walter back in a few months and revisit this topic, because wealth of knowledge here.
Thanks, guys.
Good night.
Peace and love.